Hi everyone, I'm meteorologist Gary Woodall, and welcome to this episode of the Mid-South Weather Musings. In this episode, we'll take a look back at April 26th, a somewhat important date in weather history. There were several significant tornado events which occurred on April 26th. We'll then take a look back at this past weekend and the wind that we experienced across the Mid-South. We'll talk a little bit about why it was so windy Saturday afternoon and evening and into the first part of Sunday. And then we'll take a look ahead. Unfortunately, it looks like severe weather may be coming back into the forecast for us here in the Mid-South. So we'll take an early look at that potential for Tuesday night and into the early morning hours of Wednesday. So taking a look back at the April 26th weather history, again, a couple of significant tornado events which occurred on that date. April 26, 1984 saw a severe thunderstorm and tornado event, primarily over Oklahoma, but extended up into the Central Plains as well. In Oklahoma, there were two rounds of severe storms actually. In the afternoon, a low precipitation supercell, LP supercell, developed, transitioned into a classic supercell, and produced several tornadoes across north central Oklahoma to the north of Oklahoma City. Then the second round occurred overnight of the 26th into the early morning hours of the 27th. A squall line moved from west to east across the state, and as that line got east of the Oklahoma City area, the line broke up into several fairly separate supercell thunderstorms that produced a couple of significant tornadoes in eastern Oklahoma, an F3 and an F4, 11 deaths from these tornadoes in Oklahoma. So while that overnight event was maybe the more meteorologically significant, the afternoon event holds some special value for me because this was the event that I studied for my master's thesis when I was going to grad school back at the University of Oklahoma. Now that event was overshadowed by the April 26, 1991 tornado outbreak. A total of 55 tornadoes occurred with this outbreak, mainly in the plains. There were 4 F4 and 1 F5 tornado, that F5 being the one here in south central Kansas, Hayesville, across Wichita, McConnell Air Force Base, and Andover, Kansas. This was a deadly event, 21 deaths, 19 of those deaths occurred in Kansas. But besides this Wichita area F5, there were some other tornadoes that made this a significant outbreak. The long track tornado here in northern Oklahoma, the Red Rock tornado, was a watershed event for the early version of the portable Doppler radar, which was being taken by the University of Oklahoma Storm Intercept team out into the field. They got some excellent data on that tornado. And then one of the tornadoes up in eastern Kansas was dubbed the Kansas Turnpike tornado. That tornado had footage of the tornado approaching and people taking shelter up underneath the girders of a highway overpass. And that led to the misconception that being up underneath those girders under a highway overpass was a safe place to be in a tornado. And of course, that's not the case. So looking back at this past weekend in the Mid-South, and why did we have so much wind Saturday afternoon, evening, and the first part of Sunday? Well, to answer that, we need to look at high pressure and low pressure down near the surface. Taking a look at this upper diagram up here, with a high pressure system, surface high pressure system, the winds will blow clockwise around that high, and the air will tend to blow outward away from the center. Now on the other hand, with a surface low pressure system, the winds will blow counterclockwise and will blow in towards the center of the low. Now if we want to think about that in a slightly different way, think of a surface high pressure area as a hilltop or a mountain. Think of a surface low pressure area as a valley. Air will behave very much like a thin fluid, and just as water wants to try to run downhill, down a hillside towards a valley, the air is going to want to tend to go downhill, if you will, from high pressure to low pressure. And this difference between the low pressure and the high pressure is called the pressure gradient force. Now, the strength of that pressure gradient force, the difference between the high and the low pressure, will affect the winds. If we have a small difference in the high and the low pressure, that'll lead to a shallow slope from high to low pressure. The air will very slowly, gradually move from the high pressure down to the low pressure. But if we have a strong high pressure and or a strong low pressure at the surface, that's going to increase that slope, and the air is going to rush downhill, if you will, from the high pressure to low pressure. Sort of like, a river rushing down a steep mountainside. So the stronger the pressure gradient force, the larger the difference between the high pressure and the low pressure, the greater the potential for strong winds. And that's definitely what we saw on Saturday afternoon. This is a surface weather map from 4 o'clock Saturday afternoon. The squiggly lines that you see here are called isobars. They're lines of constant pressure. Now, if you do any hiking or mountain climbing activities, you may be familiar with topographic maps. Well, these isobars are similar to the height lines that you might see on a topographic map. So Saturday afternoon, we had high pressure over eastern Colorado, low pressure centered over western Kentucky, very near Paducah. Notice, though, all the isobars, all these pressure lines sort of packed together across the Mid-South. That indicates a tight pressure gradient, a strong pressure gradient force, and this is what set the stage for those strong winds that we experienced Saturday afternoon and into early on Sunday. So taking a look ahead now into the Tuesday night and early Wednesday time frame, this is the Storm Prediction Center's severe thunderstorm outlook, and a slight risk over the plains up towards the mid-Mississippi Valley. Slight risk is 2 out of 5 on SPC's outlook scale. Marginal risk over a majority of the Mid-South, and that's 1 out of 5 on the SPC scale. It looks like the storms will form during the late afternoon or early evening hours from the southern plains up to the mid-Mississippi Valley, gradually then start moving and building east and southeast towards the Mid-South and coming across Tuesday night into the early morning hours of Wednesday. At this point, it looks like one of the questions that we'll have is how much instability will there be in the atmosphere? How much fuel will there be for the thunderstorms when they come in, since they are going to be coming in overnight? This is something that we'll need to look at and evaluate as we get in closer to the event, but since it will be coming in overnight, that would suggest that maybe the instability won't be as strong as if they were coming through during the afternoon or early evening hours. But we'll just need to keep an eye on the forecast for the next day and a half, and see if and how this outlook changes. At this point, though, looks like yet another overnight thunderstorm event for us here in the Mid-South. So that's going to wrap it up for this episode of the Mid-South Weather Musings. If you like what you've seen, be sure and subscribe. Like us and subscribe on YouTube. Like us and follow us on Facebook. That way you'll be notified of other future episodes that we put out. And if there are any topics that you'd like us to cover, be sure and make note of those in the comments section as well, and we'll try to work those into a future episode as well. So again, thank you all so much for watching. Again, hope you enjoyed the presentation and the information, and everybody keep safe.